All right, let's jump right into one of biology's great puzzles. Out in the islands of Southeast Asia, there's this invisible line, a barrier that for millions of years kept two totally different animal worlds apart. But today, that line is being crossed, and the fallout is literally rewriting the map of life.
So, to really get this, let me throw a real head-scratcher at you. You've got a tiger in Borneo. Now, you'd think its closest relative would be somewhere nearby, right? But get this, genetically, it's more like a polar bear from the Arctic than it is to this little marsupial called a cuscus, which literally lives on the very next island over. How on earth does that make any sense? Well, it all comes down to that invisible line.
And here we are, looking at the Indo-Malay Archipelago. Back in the 19th century, the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace was traveling through here, and he just noticed something was off. The animals on islands like Borneo looked totally Asian. But then you just take a short boat ride east to Sulawesi, and suddenly, boom, you're looking at Australian animals, marsupials, weird birds, the whole lot. He literally drew a line on the map, right there, splitting these two worlds, and we still call it Wallace's Line.
Now here's the key. This isn't just some random line he drew. It actually traces these incredibly deep oceanic trenches. So think about it. Even during the Ice Ages, when sea levels dropped and a lot of western islands became part of mainland Asia and the eastern islands connected to Australia, this deep channel of water always remained. It was like a permanent moat that land mammals just could not cross.
And this just shows you the result perfectly. To the west, on what we call the Sunda Shelf, you get this rich animal life straight out of Asia. We're talking tigers, primates, deer. But you cross that line to the Sahel Shelf, and it's like stepping through a portal. You're in the world of Australian fauna, marsupials like the cuscus and wallabies. It is a complete biological reset button in the space of just a few miles.
So, for millions and millions of years, this barrier held strong, creating two completely separate evolutionary stories. But, it's not totally foolproof. So the really big question for ecologists like us is, how did some animals finally manage to get across? And maybe more importantly, what in the world happened when they showed up in a place they were never meant to be?
Well, it turns out there are pretty much two ways. First, on very, very rare occasions, a few species made it on their own. We call that natural dispersal. Macaques somehow got over to the island of Sulawesi and did great for themselves. But the second way, and this is the big one, is with our help. Yep, humans have been shuffling animals back and forth across this line for thousands of years.
And this whole process of us helping them cross has been going on for a long, long time. I mean, it kicked off around 4,000 years ago. You had Neolithic people bringing pigs, civets, even more macaques with them in their boats, probably as a food source. Then, much more recently, Europeans brought over things like deer. And today, the floodgates are wide open. We're talking at least 78 introduced species just in Indonesia, brought for food, for trade, or even just as escaped pets. That ancient barrier is effectively being erased.
So all of this human activity has basically set up this huge, unplanned ecological experiment. And as field biologists, this is where it gets really interesting for us. We just had to understand the consequences. So what do? We set up camera traps all across the archipelago. We put our little silent observers out in the native Asian ranges in Borneo, and then in their new island homes in places like Sulawesi, New Guinea, all to see what really happens when these animals cross that ancient line.
We decided to focus on one central question. When a species gets into a totally new ecosystem, one with different predators, different competitors, does its population just explode? This is a classic idea in invasion biology, the thought that newcomers can get way more abundant in their new homes. We really wanted to test if that was true here.
Okay, and here it is. This is the raw data straight from our cameras. This chart shows you our best estimate for how abundant 4 key mammal groups are. That first column for each one, that's our baseline. Their numbers on their home turf in Borneo. The columns next to it show what happens as they move east across Wallace's Line into these new islands. Just take a second and look at the bars. See any patterns? Is it what you would have expected?
Honestly, the first result that just jumped right off the page at us was the macaques. Remember, they were one of the few that crossed the line naturally a long, long time ago. And what our data showed was just incredible. On average, we found 3.3 times more macaques at our camera sites in Sulawesi than we did back in their native Borneo. They are absolutely thriving in this new world.
But, and this is a huge but, here's the twist. For all those species that humans brought over, the Malay civets, the Rusa deer, the pigs, the story was totally different. Their numbers were basically the same as back home in their native range. They didn't explode at all, and that was a huge surprise.
It really suggests that just being new to an area isn't a golden ticket to a population boom.
And this discovery leads us into an even deeper mystery. I mean, if it's not about a simple population explosion, then what really happens when these new neighbors arrive? Well, it turns out the real ecological consequences are way more complex, way more unpredictable than just counting heads.
Now, don't get me wrong, the threat is very real. Introduced species are linked to extinctions on islands all over the globe. For example, those macaques in New Guinea are a nightmare for native birds that have never ever had to deal with a clever primate raiding their nests. But, and this is the tricky part, when we go looking for the hard data, the direct proof of damage on a whole population, sometimes it's really patchy and hard to pin down.
Our camera traps also gave us this incredible behavioral twist that shows you just how complicated this all is. Take a look at the Malay civet. Okay, so on the left, that's its native home, Borneo. Its numbers have no real link to how close it is to a river. It's a generalist, it lives everywhere. But now look at the right. In its new home on Halmahera, its population goes through the roof near rivers and then just plummets the farther away you get. It has completely changed how it lives.
So this is the really critical takeaway. Even if the total number of animals stays the same, their whole role in the ecosystem can shift dramatically. The civet basically became a river specialist. And this is exactly the kind of unpredictable change that worries ecologists, because it could create this intense, focused competition with native animals that also need those river habitats to survive.
When you put it all together, the exploding macaques, the stable deer populations, the behavior-shifting civets, it all points to this massive challenge for conservation. How in the world do you protect these incredibly unique island ecosystems from threats that you can't even predict? This, right here, is the really sobering conclusion from our research paper. The old rules just don't seem to apply here in any predictable way. We're essentially flying blind, trying to manage this massive ongoing experiment with a very limited ability to forecast what's going to happen next.
And just to add one final layer of complication, it turns out humans ourselves might be playing this weird, unexpected role. You see, hunting is widespread across the archipelago, and it might actually be keeping the populations of many of these introduced species down. It's possible that this pressure, even though it's often not sustainable, is accidentally stopping some of these new populations from exploding and wiping out the native animals. It's a messy, paradoxical situation.
Which brings us right back to the ultimate challenge. Wallace's Line was a barrier that was built by geology over millions of years, and today it's being erased by people in just a few decades. In a world where animals can show up and completely rewrite their own rules, the biggest question we face is this: how do you protect an ecosystem from a future you can't even predict?